Greetings, salutations, and welcome to another Sunday sermon. I am Reverend Riff, and I just want to thank everybody for being here. This is our second in our custom sermon series. This one is for Mr. Kurt Cummings. He asked for Bible battles, so Bible battles is what he gets. There are some really interesting and strange battles, and some of them kind of shake out historically. Some of them seem like complete nonsense, but we're going to talk about them because that's what we do here. So welcome and thank you for being here. Also, it is the first NFL Sunday, so if you've got a team that you root for, fuck you, because I've got my team. So, as you can see. But no, I hope everybody enjoys the start of the NFL season. If you don't like football, good for you too. Go read a book. The football people will be busy and probably not bothering you because they'll be busy footballing. So, so we're gonna do this, and maybe it'll earn us a little goodwill with the big dragon upstairs, or it might piss him off. We'll never know. The Steelers lose by 50 points tonight. Put that on me. But yeah, so Bible battles. We're gonna talk about a few different ones today, and then some interesting fallout that happens from those battles. I think that's actually as cool as anything too. So let's talk armaments. What were these guys fighting with? Let's just get that out of the way right at the beginning. We're talking like peak Bronze Age here, which, despite every like picture you've ever seen of like guys fighting with swords and shit, that was way less common. Way less common. You see, they didn't really fight with swords back then. Not in the traditional way we think of during the Bronze Age. They mostly would have been like daggers, very short swords. A lot of that, halberds, spears, javelins, that kind of stuff, real common. The Egyptians had some chariots, and that put them head and shoulders above a lot of people. The Egyptian chariot was kind of the tank of its time. A lot of archers, bows and arrows. You know, not compound bows though, just very simple, basic bows. And then the Israelites were really handy with a slingshot. They were very good with slings. They, they got the job done with that. We talked in an earlier sermon about the 700 men from left-handed slingers from Benjamin who could sling a hair or sling a stone within the width of a hair of their target. That's pretty accurate. So that's kind of what these guys fought with. The Israelites never, during the Old Testament, got really good at metallurgy. They didn't. The Egyptians had made sure when they were enslaved to them that they didn't learn it. That was the one thing they didn't let them do, and they never really picked up. There's numerous instances of them having to go get weapons from somebody else. The Shamgar story. That's very indicative of the time. He used the ox goad because they didn't really have weapons. And also, we talked about the ox goad symbolizes that it was a farmer's rebellion. But, it was not... These were peasant armies. These were not armies of... There weren't a whole lot of elite shock troops. Not a whole lot of armor overall. There were definitely some elite troops, some true professional soldiers in their ranks, but for the most part, these guys were farmers who killed you with whatever they had at hand. So I just think that helps clarify what we're about to talk about. So, without much further ado, we're doing the Bible battles, and let's get it on. So our first story is the Eye Gouge. Now, if you remember our little story about Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, that's about as famous a story as they have, right? You know, they march around the city 7 times, they blow the trumpets, walls fall down, chaos ensues. We also talked about how that was actually more probably a covert stealth mission where Joshua's troops used Rahab's cord to climb in and hid there and then burst out and threw the gates open. And maybe that's what they mean by the gates just magically fell down. It just, they thought it sounded cooler for divine stuff. I actually think the Tom Clancy style stealth mission was cooler, but that's just me. So, Ai was the next battle. This was a city that was just off to the west of Jericho. So, these people kind of knew when Jericho fell, like, oh shit, he's coming to us. So, Joshua, his men scout the city and they tell him, dude, there's going to be a cakewalk. There's not that many people there. It's not like a super well defended city. You don't need to send the whole army. Don't send the whole army up there. Don't make them march all the way over there just to kick these guys' ass. So he sends a small portion of his army. They got their asses handed to them. Now, 36 guys dying doesn't sound like a lot. And in the grand scheme of some of these battles with some of the numbers they throw around, it's not. But it never mentions that they killed any of the defenders. It kind of seems like they got whitewashed. So, yeah, they returned back and they are depressed. They're like, look what happened. We lost. And Joshua is beside himself. He goes, he tears his clothes, he prostrates himself before God, and he's like, dude, what happened? God goes, Joshua, remember when I told you to destroy Jericho and not take any of the plunder, to just completely destroy the city? Somebody didn't listen. And that's why I let you guys get your ass kicked by this tiny little city. Which, when you think about it, is really rough because it means like even if you have the superior force and everything, God might just screw the pooch with your battle just to prove a point. That's kind of intense when you think about it. So let's read it. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us in the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If we had all been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say? Now that Israel has been routed by its enemies, the Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear of this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What will you do for your great name? So basically, what you saw there is Joshua just said, like, seriously, God, if you were just going to have us get our ass kicked over here and let us get killed by them, we could have just stayed over in Egypt, or we could have stayed on the other side of the Jordan. We didn't need to get into all this. God does not dig his lack of enthusiasm. And God basically, it's kind of funny. God basically tells him, like, bitch, please. Somebody didn't follow the rules. So I'm teaching you a lesson here. Calm down. And so they go through this whole big thing where God tells him, have everybody walk in front of you and you question them about who did it to find out who looted Jericho when they were not supposed to. And they get to this guy named Achan. And Achan cops to it. It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful road from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, that's about a little over 5 pounds, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, a little over a pound, I coveted them and I took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent, with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. That's kind of a dope line. Then all Israel stoned him. And after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. So yes, they just this man broke the rule, and they slaughtered his entire family. His wife, his kids, Everybody. All his animals, everything. Over Achan they heaped a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. And yes, if you go tour the area, there is a pile of rocks that some tour guides will tell you is the pile of rocks which Achan was buried under. There's no way to... It's just... whatever. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. So after massacring this family, God was cool again. Therefore, that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. So yeah, that's, kind of what happened there. It's really intense, right? So now God isn't mad anymore. So now Joshua can move on with destroying Ai the same way he destroyed Jericho. Funny little side note here. After this battle, after the Jericho battle, and this little incident where Achan and his family were killed, yeah, God changes the no plunder rule. Bale loves these God changing his mind instances. This is another. God goes, you know what? Plunder is fine now. It's almost like the no plunder rule wasn't really a good rule because it was kind of unenforceable because somebody was going to plunder. And so then God was going to have to keep killing them. So it's almost like God realized he made an unattainable level of expectation and he decided to change his mind to something more manageable. Because after you massacre one whole family, there had to be some feelings of like, dude, why did we just do that? And I wanted to take the gold. I didn't, but why are we leaving the gold? Why are we leaving the silver? Why are we not taking that shit? Oh, because God told us not to? That probably didn't go over real well. Clearly, somebody did it, and they changed the rule. So maybe it wasn't God's rule. Maybe it was Joshua's rule. Because it just seems like a funny thing to change. But yeah, after this incident, plunder was now okay. So, here's our map. There you see Ai up there from Jericho, some other cities that will become involved in our stories later today. So, Joshua gets the plan from God. And God's plan is pretty simple. He says, I want you to take your army and split it into two groups. One group, I want you to line them up right in front of the city so that they see them and that they know that you're there and you're ready for a throwdown. That's our little blue arrow there. Because I want you to take your other group, your smaller group, and hide them in some mountains to the west of the city. Joshua goes, whatever you want, God. He goes, sneak those guys over there. He said, make sure that there's a big production of you guys marching to the front of the city so that the guys going to the side are unnoticed. Joshua does this. Then he says, Joshua, I want you to start the battle. So Joshua's guys engage. As they engage, he then tells them to retreat. And Joshua's guys retreat. And I, thinking that they're routing them again, chase them. When that happens, the homies from the west come into an undefended city and begin killing everyone, and they light the city on fire. This gets the attention of the guys that were chasing the Israelites as they turn around and see their city burning. So, they turn around, but it's too late. Joshua's men then flood out of the city. They're caught in the middle, and wham. What's really interesting about this story is that there's not like a direct... It's a weird kind of magic thing. God tells Joshua to lift his javelin up and point it at the city. And that is when God divinely tells the men from the west side of the city to go in. The sneak attack occurs. And he tells Joshua holds his arm up for the entire battle. He holds the lance up, pointing at Ai. And he continues to point at Ai until the battle is done. And it's hinted strongly that if he had lowered his arm, they would have lost the battle. Yet God never actually says that to him. So it's just kind of wild. But yeah, honestly, pretty great military strategy. Present the front group, draw them out, envelop them, destroy them. It's a classic maneuver. And maybe Joshua should have just taken the credit for it since it was clearly a pretty baller move. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that the smoke was going up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle with the Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. This gets rough. And when Israel had finished killing all the men of the Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder of this city, as the Lord had instructed Joshua. There's that little change. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate. And they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which is there to this day. This is like the greatest marketing ever if you think about it. Thanks to the Bible, tour guides can point at any number of pile of rocks around the country there and be like, ah, yeah, this is a super famous pile of rocks. You may have read about it in the Bible. It's a pile of rocks. Nobody does. But yeah, kind of gruesome. But yeah, that's what happened. It was a pretty daft maneuver by Joshua there. An envelopment strategy, if you will, worked really well. And the city of Ai is no more. A funny little thing happens after that. It's really great. I love it. But it takes us right into our next story. This is a good one. It leads to a whole lot of fallout. So, the battle at Gibeon. Joshua, fresh off his victories at Jericho and Ai, he gets duped by the people of Gibeon. It's fucking great. How does he get duped? Glad you asked. So what happens is, the people of Gibeon, that's a city that's in that same area. They saw what had happened to Jericho, saw what had happened to Ai, and said, we're fucking next, guys. What are we going to do about that? We're not looking to get massacred by this dude. What do we do? So they concocted this really brilliant scheme. They got a few of their nobles and had them ride in to meet with Joshua. And they come and they presented themselves as from being very far away, that they had traveled a great distance because they had heard of this mighty army that served the one true God, and that they wanted to be friends. And they signed a pact of mutual protection and friendship. And then Joshua found out that they were actually only about a 3-day ride away. They were a city just over another mountain. He was not happy. But he had given his word, so he wouldn't attack them. Also, this is, again, Joshua completely contradicting what God had told him to do. God had told him to make no treaties with Canaanites, make no friendships. He was supposed to exterminate these people. This was a genocide mission. God had ordered the Israelites to exterminate the Canaanites. It's fucked up, but that's what he told them to do. And it's kind of funny that God apparently lets Joshua off the hook on this one because he didn't know that he was violating God's rules when he made a deal with the Gibeonites, even though God doesn't always seem to show that same consideration. This time he does, and he lets Joshua off the hook. Says, all right, yeah, but you do have to honor that. But Joshua adds a stipulation. Joshua says that you guys are only ever allowed to be woodworkers. You can cut wood and you can work the fields. That's it. You can't do anything else for us. And some people claim that this fulfills a prophecy that Moses had said about the Canaanites, that they would be the slaves of the slaves. And that's essentially what Joshua reduced them to in their interaction with him, is that the only thing they could basically do was work as woodcutters or field tillers. But hey, he wasn't exterminating them, so I guess that's supposed to be a win. Now, let's get a little closer look at this map. There you go. You see you see Jericho. That city below Bethel there, Gibeon, that would have been the Israeli way of playing Gibeon. It's the same place. So yeah, right there, the little star, that's where we're talking about. And yeah, as you can see, it is right next to Eye. So I mean, they really pulled a fast one on Joshua that he had no idea this city was over there. They pretended to be from way far away, and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. It's kind of great. Now, this alliance between Joshua and the Israelites and the people of Gibeon, this did not sit well with the other Amorite kings. As you recall, we've talked about this. King basically almost meant like mayor back then. If you ran a city, you were a king, but it was, it was a small fiefdom. It was just that city. There was no overarching king of the Amorites, just like there was no real big king of the Philistines. They may have had a senior guy, but, think of it as a city by city thing. So there's these 5 other cities with Amorite kings. They are pissed. So they decide, look, these Israelites, before they get out of hand, we got to put them down now. But first, we got to go put down Gibeon, because how dare they join up with those guys against us? Let's talk about what happened. So then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city, not founded by the Jews. Jerusalem is there now. It's an Amorite city. Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took positions against Gibeon and attacked it. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." So Joshua marched up from Gilgal with his entire army, including all the best fighting men. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." After an all-night march from Gilgal, which we'll look at a map in a minute, this is a pretty impressive march. Like, Joshua clearly put the spurs to his horses here, so to speak. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road down from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, this is also kind of, get ready for this, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as it is written in the book of Jasher. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There was never a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. So, that was the implication there, is that Joshua is the one that told God, hey, make the sun stand still. I need more time. Because that's the implication here, is that a retreat was affected by the Amorite kings, and chasing them in the dark would have been hard. So Joshua told God, hey, make the sun stand still so that we can continue this slaughter. And God obliged. And it's, kind of interesting. Is this the first answered prayer, so to speak? Like a really, truly answered prayer? Even though it didn't sound like he really asked God to do that as much as he told God to do that. Very interesting, the dynamic here between Joshua and God in this little story. But what's also interesting is that mention of the book of Jasher. The book of Jasher is only referenced twice in the Bible. Once right there, and once in 2 Samuel. David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jasher. Basically, what we can understand is that the book of Jasher is a collection of poems and war hymns. And unfortunately, it was lost to time. We don't have any copies of it. We don't know exactly what it said. But we know that apparently Joshua's little snark here, telling the son to hold on, he wasn't done killing folks, that happened. And it was written, and I guess there was allegedly a whole song about it. And David, I'm not going to read the whole song because it's depressing and really long, and I don't think David was as great of a songwriter as most people do. But he wrote a song about Saul and Jonathan, kind of eulogizing them. Again, Jonathan was most likely his lover, and so he wrote a song about his dead homie that, they had an Achilles and Patroclus thing going. Don't let anybody tell you different. And, Saul died. He felt very sad. So, let's look at this from a military strategy point of view. What happened here? All right, Jericho. Boom. It doesn't exist anymore. Boom. Ai. Doesn't exist anymore. There's our 5 kings. You see Lachish, Eglon, Jarmuth, Hebron, Jerusalem. Those are the 5 kings. They've sent all their armies up there. They've got Gibeon surrounded. See Gilgal? It's way over there. That's where Joshua took the army back after they destroyed Ai. Gilgal is where they're staying, right on the banks of the river there. Joshua hauls ass all the way over there. And so you see Joshua, he gets all the way to Gibeon in one night. He marches his guys pretty much all night. They get there in the morning, and the 5 kings are surprised. Joshua company start kicking their ass. This leads to a retreat. They start retreating towards the coast. That's when God hits them right about there with the giant lightning bolts and hail. And like I said, it says that they killed more guys that way than were actually killed in the battle. Then, down there towards Lachish and Eglon, that's when Joshua tells the sun to stand still, and it apparently listens. Fun fact, using the Mephibosheth stele, which is a large granite block inscribed with highlights of the reign of Mephibosheth, states that he battled the Israelites in Canaan around 1207 BCE. So, that would be about the time of Joshua. So we're led to believe that, there was a battle between that Egypt came over there and battled them. I'll get to why that's important in a minute. Fun little controversial history thing here. Most scholars tell you that if you go with what the Bible says, you have to believe that Moses was born sometime around the 14th century and that the Exodus occurred sometime around like 1250. Except for other people say that actually Mephibosheth there, when he battled them in 1207, that he was the guy who enslaved the Israelites in the first place. Most historians think that this is actually 2 different things. That the initial conquest was by a different pharaoh. The Egypt escaped, and Mephibosheth went back to get a little payback. And that's what happened in 1207 BCE. That's not completely germane to what we're talking about today, but I find it interesting. But what is germane to what we're talking about today is the fact that this tablet helped us date something. An annular eclipse occurred on October 30th, 1207 BCE. We know that that happened. So, this story, there's at least the possibility that this story occurred on October 30th, 1207 BCE, and that when they're talking about Joshua telling the moon and the sun to stand still, what actually happened was an annular eclipse. And think about this from the Amorites' point of view. Eclipses were traumatic back then. They scared the shit out of people because they didn't understand what was going on. So, think of that happening on the worst day in your life. Like, your army's getting crushed, and then that happens. you would attribute it to something supernatural. Next thing you know, the guys that kicked your ass start this tale that they told the sun to stand still. Yeah, it gets scary for you. A little fallout happened after that battle. Let's fast forward a little bit in time. We're now in the reign of King Saul. He did not like that deal that had been made with the Gibeonites. He did not like it at all, so much that on more than one occasion, he massacred a bunch of Gibeonites who reminded him that there was, a treaty, and he said, I'm not the one that made that treaty. Next thing you know, Saul dies in battle. We remember that. We did that, a few weeks ago. So Saul died in battle, and a drought started. And this drought had carried on for 3 years now. David is on the throne, and he's like, God, what gives? And God says, it's because of what Saul did to the Gibeonites. You got to honor that treaty, man. You guys messed up by making it in the first place. You have to honor it. So you need to receive absolution. Whatever they tell you they want, that is what you have to do to get this to stop. So during the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, it is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not a part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to swear them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. David asked the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance? The Gibeonites answered him, we have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death. What do you want me to do for you? David asked. They answered the king, as for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and we have no place anywhere in Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed, and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one. So the king said, I will give them to you. So, yeah, basically 7 guys who didn't really have much to do with this other than they're related to Saul now have to die in order to atone. So, yes, that's human sacrifice. There's no other way to look at it. God is now sanctioning human sacrifice. So the next time someone tells you that God never sanctioned human sacrifice because he stopped them from killing Isaac, yeah, he did sanction human sacrifice because he just sanctioned this. There's no other way to look at this. And David also stacks the deck. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how David chose the 7, because it would seem kind of messed up to just straight pick. But yet, who has to do that? Well, it's not in the Bible, but in some Hebrew literature, they believe that what David did is he gathered up pretty much anybody who would have fit the bill of being David's, being related to Saul. They would have qualified. And he marched them in front of the ark. And the ark basically gave a signal for ones he was supposed to keep. And said, this guy, he's getting sent. This guy, you're spared. This guy, he's getting... so they kind of put the onus that God chose the 7. Again, it's not in the Bible. We have no way of knowing if the 7 he chose were extra douchey, we do know, again, from the same story about David marching the guys in front of the ark, there's an interesting little side note. One of Saul's grandsons was named Mephibosheth. He was a son of Jonathan, David's lover. And when Saul and Jonathan died, he was just a baby. And his nurse went to grab him because they were fleeing the palace. Because, when the king dies, usually everybody else associated with the king dies. So as they were fleeing, the baby was dropped and his legs were broken. So Mephibosheth was lame his whole life. When David found out about him later in life, David took care of him. And David restored him to the status that he would have enjoyed were Saul still on the throne and he was, grandson to the king. And David gave him a bunch of money and made sure that he was well taken care of. Well, Mephibosheth would have technically been somebody that should have been part of this lineup. In the Hebrew tradition, the idea is that God tagged Mephibosheth to go, and David nixed it and sent somebody else, a different Mephibosheth, because apparently, as ridiculous as that name is, they named two kids that. The king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan of Saul. Yeah, it was his boyfriend, so he didn't let his boyfriend's kid get killed. That seems rational. But the king took Armani and Mephibosheth, the two sons of Aiah's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai the Mephelite. Do you guys remember Merab from our story a couple weeks ago? Merab, actually even our story last week, Merab was the first daughter, the initial one that was offered to David, who then, because David said, well, how can I afford a dowry to the king? She was given to this other guy. And kind of fucked up. David takes all 5 of her sons to be executed for this. Maybe there was some harsh feelings there. Maybe. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who kills them and exposed their bodies on a hill before the Lord. Most ideas believe they were hung and just left there hanging. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies, she did not let the birds touch them by day or the wild animals by night. When David was told what Aiah's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. They had stolen their bodies from the public square at Beth-shan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck down Saul in Gilboa. If you remember, we talked about that. The Philistines, when they killed Saul, they put him and Jonathan's bodies on display to remind everybody the king was dead. But the people of Jabesh Gilead, who had been saved by Saul in an earlier story that we talked about, they went and stole the bodies. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish, at Zelah in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered in prayer on behalf of the land. And there are some here that claim that it wasn't the death of those 7 people that God cared about as much as showing respect to Saul and Jonathan's bodies somehow, which makes no sense because God is the one that let Saul get killed because he didn't want him to be king anymore. He had changed his mind and decided that David was his dude. So, yeah, did those 7 people die unnecessarily? Almost assuredly. Also, just kind of a fucked up story, but yeah, that's human sacrifice that God sanctioned. There's no other way to look at it. True little interesting tidbit here. This story is why many Christians are against cremation. They believe that like having a permanent resting place for the body so that it can be resurrected at the end is important, and they claim that this story is a roundabout way of God telling you that taking care of corpses is important. If that's what you took from that story, you need help. Seek professional help. All right, let's talk about Gideon. He's fighting Midian, and I love that that rhymes. Gideon was a judge during a time of conflict between the Israelites and the Midianites, because, pretty much the entire Old Testament is conflict. And Gideon slots in our lineage of judges right after Shamgar. The Israelite army was large in number, but mostly they were inexperienced guys. Gideon had a lot of guys. The Bible puts his army at around 32,000. Those numbers are almost assuredly inflated, just like the Romans used to do and everybody else, but around that. But they were still going up against a really formidable army that most people think was around 100,000. So they were still outnumbered. And to make it worse, Gideon's army, again, most of it was farmers. This is definitely one of God's more weird show-off stories, because militarily, what's about to happen doesn't make any sense. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all of his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." Yes, God said, your army's too big, and if you lead that big army and win this battle, you won't think that I did it for you. You'll think you did it yourself. Let the showing off begin. So now, announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 dudes bounced. Now he's got an army of 10,000. And Gideon's like, cool, it's not good, but I think I could do this with 10,000 guys. The Lord said to Gideon, still too many men. Take them down to the water. I will thin it out for you there. Now, when God says things like that, you should genuinely get worried that a whole bunch of people are going to die. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the band down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues, as a dog laps, from those who kneel to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. What's going on there? He told them, take these guys down to the water. If they bend down, scoop the water up in their hands, and drink it like this, they're good. If they get down on their knees and dunk their head into the stream to drink, no, we're not taking those guys. When I was a kid, my father used to try to say that God knew they were better fighters because the cupped ones were still prepared. If they lifted the water up and drank it like that, they were still prepared for battle versus the people who just dunked their head in, that they exposed themselves, so clearly that guy was not a good soldier. I think that is a really weird litmus test for fighting ability, but cool. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. Watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 300 men and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, and they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled the Ben-Shittah towards Sherah as far as the border of Abel-Maleah near Tabbath. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh were all called out, and they pursued the Midianites. And then we can, we'll just finish the thing before we try to unpack that. Gibeon sent messengers all throughout the country of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them, as far as Beth-barah. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they seized the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth-barah. They also captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. I got nothing. That's just like he killed this guy at the place named after him and this guy at the place named after him. That seems like a real FU. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. So, yeah, that's what they did. They surrounded the camp of the Midianites with a jar in this hand that had a torch inside of it, so you couldn't see the torch burning, and in the other hand a trumpet. And they threw the jars down, and they smashed, and then held up the torch, and then they blew the trumpet and shouted, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. This apparently scared the shit out of the Midianites, who all woke up and started stabbing each other, and then fled in a disorganized mess, which allowed them to be easily mopped up by the rest of Israel. Which is also funny because you see, Gideon only has his 300 men, right? And God wanted to make sure that he did this with only 300 men, so he got all the credit. Yet the story very clearly states that when the Midianites were on the run, he then called all those other people to come get him. So he didn't really do this with 300 men. He started this with 300 men, but he still needed the large number of other guys to help with the mop up. And I mean, there's a little side story in there that the Midianites had had dreams put on them by God of a loaf of bread that rolled down out of the hills and destroyed their tents. And the claim is that God put that dream in them so that they were already nervous about Gideon and his men. And then at night, all of a sudden, they see hundreds of lit torches, they hear trumpets, and they hear people shouting about the Lord and Gideon. And they assume that Gideon is the representation of that loaf of bread that rolled out of the mountains and destroyed their tents. And so these people all freak out and start killing each other. That's a big tactic of God's, by the way. Turning people on themselves, like having armies kill each other, that's one of God's favorite tactics. And if you don't see the metaphor there, I can't help you. But it's kind of fucked up. God likes to turn people on each other. It's his tactic. Again, I'm just reading the book. Let's talk about the mix-up at Michmash. This just has fun names, and this is a great story because I get to say something that I really enjoy. Saul and the Philistines have been battling back and forth. Philistines held a bit of the upper hand at this point. It's not good. Saul's army, they're holding their own, but they're not gaining any ground. They're actually losing a little. Jonathan pulls the original Leroy Jenkins and starts the battle prematurely, which results in a lot of Saul's troops fleeing in terror. I mean that exactly how it's written. Jonathan literally goes Leroy Jenkins and charges the fucking army with one person, his sword bearer, who may also have been his boyfriend at this point, now that David was off and married. And, yeah, they definitely freaked out Saul's guys. Saul's army goes, what the fuck, who started a battle? We weren't ready for a battle yet. We were still strategizing, and Leroy Jenkins is out there starting a fight. God tells Saul he's losing his kingship over a technicality, but allows him to win the battle because, yeah, who fucking knows? What is that technicality? Well, you see, God had told Saul, don't do anything till Samuel gets there. When Jonathan went all Leroy Jenkins, Saul freaked out and goes, this must be time to start the battle. But I'm not going to start yet. I'm supposed to wait for Samuel. And he waits a little while. Samuel's still not there yet. Saul goes, I'm just going to do the offering, the pre-battle offering now because we need to start this battle. So I'm going to do the pre-battle offering now. So Saul does his pre-battle offering. Right then, Samuel shows up and goes, hey, what gives? That's my job. And why didn't you wait? And Saul goes, I didn't think I could wait. I thought I needed to start the battle now, and you have to do the sacrifice before the battle. This really cheeses off Samuel, who in turn talks to God, and God goes, that's it, Saul's out. Saul, you will not be king of Israel anymore because you didn't wait. And that seems like an uber technicality, but hey, it's not my rules. So Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, come, let's go over the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Do what you have in mind, his armor-bearer said. Go ahead. I am with you heart and soul. Yeah, they're probably just friends. Jonathan said, come on then. We will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. Yes, his big plan is to let the Philistines know that he's there. And if the Philistines say, hey, let's fucking rumble, then they're going to rumble. And if the Philistines ignore them, then that will be their signal to not start a fight. Not great logic here. The Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Notice at no point did God say that this was the plan. Jonathan just decided that the plan was if they talk shit, they're going to get hit. Kind of a fuck around, find out was his plan. And God never signed off on that. But Jonathan assumed that he had. Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet, with his armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about a half an acre. Which is a pretty good kill radius. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp in the field, and those in the outposts and the raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. Saul's lookouts at Gibeon and Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, "Muster the forces and see who has left us." When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God." At the time, it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Then Saul and all his assembled men went to the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were there with Saul and Jonathan. Again, God gets people to switch sides. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in part pursuit. These Johnny-come-latelys. Now all the guys that ran away now want to be a part of the great victory. That's like the people who leave a football game when, the team's really losing, but then when they come back and win, those people everybody wants to tell you that they actually stayed for the whole game, but yet when you could see on TV that no one was actually there. Similar thing going on here. So on that day, the Lord saved Israel, and the battle moved beyond Beth Aven. Oh, what's happening? So, yeah, like, that whole thing is basically John goes, or Jonathan, our boy John, he goes Leroy Jenkins, runs up the hillside, starts a fight. God decides to help him out and turns the Philistines on each other. And then at the last minute, all the guys who had completely abandoned the fight decide to join back in at the end, and they win. So this is a great victory for Saul over the Philistines. It is promptly followed up by a loss against the Philistines where Saul is forced to kill himself. So why God gave them the victory here doesn't make a lot of sense. It almost sounds like maybe they just won a battle here, and then they lost the next battle, and somebody retconned it into sounding a lot cooler than it actually did. That's kind of what I'm taking from it. I mean, it's, but yeah, again, key takeaway here. God's number one tactic is turning people on each other. I was really struck when I was researching this episode how many times that's like the go-to maneuver is to turn people on each other. And it really drove home to me just some weird shit that I didn't really think it was a great look, but it was a look nonetheless. So maybe, oh, you made it in time for the end. Oh, welcome, Curtis. Oh man, but yeah, we had some fun. We talked about some
Praise
crazy.
Hail, praise Hail.
But you'll be able to watch the VOD, and I'll obviously put it up on YouTube too. But yeah, we just talked about the Leroy Jenkins of the Bible, and the time that someone went Leroy Jenkins, and God respects that kind of recklessness clearly because he rewarded it. So that's the only thing you can take, is that God sanctions Leroy Jenkins level nonsense. No, hello. And also that God's number one tactic in battle is to turn people on each other, which is also, there's a whole lot to unpack there. I'm trying to not get super spicy with it, but there's a whole lot to unpack there. That God's number one tactic. Yeah, I'm legit shocked that Leroy Jenkins is not an account too. That's amazing. But I hope you have a great day, Kurt. I hope you do when you get to watch the whole thing. You enjoy it. And yeah. I hope you have fun with the hunts today. I believe you're doing some hunting. But thanks for being here. And yeah, Bible battles, folks. These are some wacky ones. None of these make a whole lot of sense militarily. Well, the battle at Eye does. The battle at Eye does. The rest of these seem kind of wacky, but they happened. They were real as anything else in the Bible. Let's put it that way. Historians can't really validate a lot of this stuff, but I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone. But I hope everyone has a marvelous Sunday. I hope you enjoy it doing whatever you want to do. Be well, and do not turn on each other. Take that away from today. That when people are scared, they turn on each other. So don't turn on each other. We're in this together. Let's not turn on each other. That's what I want you to take away from this today. Because, and maybe you don't trust the guy that turns everybody on each other. I think that's another takeaway. If something causes people to constantly turn on each other, maybe it's not a good thing. That's what I'm going to go with. I love you all. Love each other. And be well.